I am Dr. Samuel J.
And I am Dr. Brian Schrader.
And this is Sports
Nerd! He's got to find a way to keep Klitschko on the back foot. Because if Klitschko gets back into a rhythm, yes, he can take control back of the round easily. Oh, Klitschko, but he's still standing. Oh, the uppercut, left hook down. Klitschko for the second time in the fight.
And we are back. Your two favorite college professors talking sports and ruining all the fun. You can find us, subscribe to us, and rate us on iTunes and Stitcher. You can follow us on Facebook at Sports Nerds and on Twitter at _Sports Nerds. And we are on YouTube. The easiest way to access and subscribe to our YouTube channel is via the YouTube tab on the left side of our Facebook page. As previously mentioned, Dr. Sean Foreman will be joining the show next week, as long as everything happens as planned. Dr. Foreman is the founder of Baseball Reference, president of Sports Reference, and one of the shepherds of advanced analytics entry into mainstream sports conversation. If you have questions for Dr. Foreman, please have them to us by the end of the day on Thursday, May 4th. We will be taping our conversation with Sean later this week. Today, our focus will be the layoffs at ESPN that occurred last week, but let's first offer up this week's advanced stat. It comes to us from Neil Payne at 538. Brian, have you listened to much 538, our podcast, lately?
To the sports podcast?
Hot Takedown, yeah.
Hot Takedown?
Yeah.
I listened to the most recent one,
Okay.
but I've been off it a little bit. I think the election kind of, I was listening to more political stuff. But
You did get wrapped up
listened.
in the election.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's not going
well
anytime soon.
No.
Yeah,
No.
I listened to the last one, but I need to get it back in my regular rotation.
Yeah, I do too. I just sometimes the topics are not that appealing, but maybe it's because baseball season's back, so I'd like to get into those numbers. And one of those numbers, again, comes to us from Neil Payne, and it's 15. Okay, so 15 is the difference in the adjusted on-base plus slugging number, which I'll explain momentarily, between the Colorado Rockies at Coors Field and the Colorado Rockies on the road since 1995, which is the year that the Rockies started playing at Coors. So plus 15 places the Rockies above the Astros 11 and the Padres and the Pirates plus 10. And in lay terms, this means that as much as we like to talk about the issues with pitching at Coors Field, it would appear that an equal or maybe even more significant issue with the Rockies is that Rockies hitters simply cannot hit once they leave Blake Street. And so, Brian, before you chime in, adjusted OBPS is on-base percentage plus slugging percentage, adjusted for the park and the league in which the player plays or played. So to give you an idea of what this means historically, the all-time OBP plus leaders are Babe Ruth, Ted Williams, Barry Bonds, Lou Gehrig, and Rogers Hornsby. And when I saw this, it just reminded me that as much of an asshole as Barry Bonds was, he probably still is one of the greatest hitters of all time. But
No doubt.
So that number, I kind of, that was a nice, I guess, breath of fresh air, because you and I have talked about it, other people have talked about it. Everybody blames pitching at Coors and how awful it is. You know, they installed the humidor. But it looks like, and I think if you watch the Rockies enough, you recognize this sometimes, that the hitting, right, there seems to be this hangover, this Coors hangover that players like Carlos Gonzalez and Arenado and Charlie Blackmon, they just can't hit away from the ballpark. And so when you hear the stat, what kind of resonates with you?
Man, I've heard the ballpark factor stuff forever growing up in, or what is ballpark effect, whatever the actual name of the stat is, which is where statisticians, sabermetricians try to adjust. You know, if you play at a park that's more friendly for hitting, can we figure out a way to sort of compare your offensive statistics with teams who play in parks that are more favorable or less favorable, whatever. So like this is something that I've kind of always been familiar with, and I was always kind of like, does this really matter? I mean, you play half your games on the road. It seems like that benefit would equal out. I mean, even if it is easier to hit in Coors Field, at Coors Field. It's not like you have an advantage over other teams when they come to Coors Field, right? It's just as easy for them to hit. So I always kind of thought that this is a non-issue. This article, I've never heard most of these arguments before. This was, I think, Neil Payne's article on 538 that you're talking about.
Yes.
And he makes the claim that or that he at least suggests there might be reason to think that the Rockies, because they kind of get used to hitting at Coors Field when they go on the road, don't hit as well. And the way he kind of phrased it in this article is, it's not like the Rockies are good hitters historically who just perform exceptionally well at Coors Field. It's that they perform sort of fine at Coors Field and terribly on the road. And
Right.
kind of says that this is why they made the playoffs three times in 25 years. And then he offers like a bunch of interesting suggestions as to maybe why this is happening. That that pitchers change their tactics when they come to Coors Field, and that sort of messes with the Rockies' ability to face those same pitchers on the road, which is something other teams don't have to deal with. Or maybe it has to do with kind of like the bite on a breaking ball, on a curveball or something like that, being different at Coors Field than it is in other places. So I guess my reaction is, this is clearly more than just ballpark effect, right? That's kind of my point, that I used to think this was a non-issue, but this was a pretty compelling read. Yeah, I mean, if you read this article, Neil Payne kind of at the end says, we don't really know. He doesn't really. He says it could be this, it could be this. But there's reason to think maybe, but also maybe not on a lot of these things.
No, I think
the answer to the question, but
absolutely. I guess when I was reading it, it made me think of just how bad that organization is. That's really what I thought. The inability to effectively kind of draft and groom players that hit well, not just at Coors but elsewhere. And I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but for so long, I think the upper management has just kind of leveraged Coors in this notion that players are just better at Coors. And I guess, what am I trying to say here? Maybe they've used the inflated numbers at Coors Field to hide the fact that they are just not drafting the best prospects. And maybe, I don't know. I don't really have any evidence here to kind of back that up. But I think it just goes to show that you have a team or teams made up of folks that just they don't have the kind of skill set necessary to excel in kind of adverse situations, different ballparks, etc. They don't play the type of baseball game that is effective, especially in the National League. Maybe that's what I'm trying to get at. I don't know. Did that make sense?
It does make sense. But I think that Neil Payne's point is that maybe there's reason to think that even if you brought in the best players or the best prospects, that because they would play half their games at Coors, they would not be as good. Does that make sense? If you were to take Mike Trout or someone and move them to Colorado, that maybe for whatever reason, it's a change in pitching tactics or a change in the flight of the ball or the inflated sense of hitting that you get at Coors Field, means that even great players would get used to Coors Field in kind of a negative way, and then perform poorly on the road. You know what I was thinking about when I was reading this was, it's like the inverse. It's the opposite of why runners train in Colorado at high altitude.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Like,
yes,
if you're a
exactly.
runner, you go to Colorado and you run at 10,000 feet. So when you go to sea level, you're like, wow, oxygen, this is amazing. I can run forever. It's the opposite of that. You play too many games at Coors, and you're hitting the ball like crazy because the air is thin, and because pitchers aren't using their full arsenal, and because there's not very much bite on their breaking ball. And then you go to sea level, and suddenly the ball doesn't go as far, and pitchers are using a wider array of pitches, and those pitches are performing better than they otherwise would. Again, Neil Payne says that maybe those things aren't true about Coors Field, so I'm just kind of using hyperbole here. But it is. It's sort of the opposite of that training at altitude. It's training at altitude is a bad thing. But if that's true, if that's the argument that he's suggesting here, and I think that's my read of this, then it doesn't matter. It kind of is like the Rockies can't do it. There's a line in this article where he says maybe there's reason to think that they'll always just be bad because of the altitude, because you have to play half your games in Colorado.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That would be, man. They need to change something up.
Maybe they should make the whole stadium into a humidor, like they did for the baseballs, like build it inside.
Ooh, I wonder if that would. I wonder if that would actually do anything. It would make going to Coors not nearly as fun. But
that's true. Yeah.
I don't know.
There should be no inside baseball stadiums, in my opinion. Maybe a topic for a different day.
We'll save that. We'll save that.
Save it.
I don't know. I do think that upper management just kind of sucks there. But anyhow.
No, I think you're right. No, look, and here's a different way to think about this. Is there a way to say we know that playing at Coors, playing in Denver is different than playing any place else on the in the United States where there's currently professional baseball teams? Is there a way to design a team that benefits from that? Right? I mean, like that's something they had to learn early on, that they were bringing in fireballers and they were just blowing out their arms in Coors Field. I've joked all the time that if you let me run this team, I would just have dudes who could rake, right? Guys who are going to come in and hit bombs. Like I want 9 Mark Reynolds out there, just swinging for the fences all the time. I don't care if you're good at defense, and all of the pitchers, I just want ground ball pitchers, like just sinker ballers or sliders. Don't come here and throw a fastball. Just get the ball on the ground, right? And then you go, you win 70 games at home, and then you only have to win, like 10 or 12 games on the road.
It would seem like that.
Do you like that model? You think I would?
I do. I mean, they need to try something different, right? Because it is.
Yeah, but I want them winning. They need to be winning games at home, like 25-24. Like just get in shootouts at home and know that you're designed to win those shootouts. Like who cares if you get an error? It doesn't matter. We're going to score runs. Like you should go into it saying we're going to put up crooked numbers all the time.
Yep.
And if you can do that, and other teams can't design, then you get an advantage, right? What I was saying before is there's not a real advantage to playing at Coors Field because the other teams get to play there too, right? Yes. It's like you don't get an advantage over other teams. They're also hitting at altitude. The advantage that you can get is if you design your team around that advantage, because all the other teams in the NL West or other teams that visit Coors Field can't design their team around Coors Field because they're only going to play at most 8 games there, something like that, 9 games.
I like that approach. That makes a hell of a lot of sense, right? It's kind of like it's a Moneyball approach. It's a different kind of game, but it's still that kind of the same thing that Billy Beane had to do, considering the talent that they had with the A's, right? You have to figure out what your advantage is because the other teams obviously they don't have that, and so you're right? Why can't the Rockies do that, right? Just build a team that's going to really take advantage of and leverage everything that Coors has to offer for 81 games a year, and just figure out how to win 10, 15 games the rest of the year. Like that would be a really good approach. There we go. Let's write our book right now.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can buy a share of the Rockies. Hey, before we move on, I just want to exactly. Before moving on, I wanted to highlight just the importance of that statistic, right? OPS, sorry, it's just OPS plus. OPS plus. I mean, this stat, I don't know. You and I have talked about WHIP when it comes, or not WHIP, but FIP when it comes to pitching is kind of being, FIP is being one of the really, really important statistics for pitching. But I think
fielding independent pitching stats for those of you who may not be up on your baseball dorkitude.
We'll have to get into this with Sean too. Remind me to ask him, what he thinks is the most important stat or stats. But so OPS plus, to give you an idea, I know, but to give you an idea of just how spot on that statistic is, here's a rundown of the last 5 NL leaders. Ryan Zimmerman. Oh, sorry, that's this year. Let me go back one. Joey Votto last year, right? We could argue that Joey Votto is probably one of the top 5 hitters in the game.
I read an article that said that guy probably should have won. He's won an MVP once, I think.
But he should have won it. Yeah,
he probably should have won a handful of them.
Yes, but he's in Cincinnati and they're awful. Bryce Harper, Andrew McCutchen, Paul Goldschmidt, Buster Posey. That's the last 5. We could all say 5 fantastic top 10 players in the game. At least top 2 or 3 in their position. And then, of course, the American League. Mike Trout, Jose Abreu, Cabrera, Mike Trout. So, I think Mike Trout, what he has done since he came into the league, he's a Hall of Famer now if he retired. And he's, how old is Trout? 27? 26, 27? Maybe?
25.
Oh, my God. Oh, that's a dude, right? Nobody, we pay attention to. Obviously, because he's fantastic. But imagine if he played for the Yankees. My God. That's all
you remember that second season he came back and he gained like 40 pounds? And everyone was like, he made money, he went to Taco Bell too much, he's not going to steal bases anymore. None of that was true.
No.
He was like 30 pounds of muscle and was just as fast. That guy is a freak.
He really is, man. Oh, okay. So there you go, folks. Delve deep into your baseball reference this week and track. If you want to track baseball, track it through that website because I think it's a fantastic go-to, and it'll be fun to talk to Sean about how it got launched and all that stuff.
even pay attention to the podcast anymore. I'm just looking at advanced stats now.
No, it's just ridiculous.
Matt Holliday is 12th on the list of active OPS, adjusted OPS plus. This is a really dorky clarification. But are you doing OPS plus or adjusted OPS plus? Because the adjusted one is the one that's adjusted for ballpark, right?
No, it's OPS plus is adjusted for ballpark already. OPS plus is already adjusted.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. I'm looking at it, which is just I think the adjusted that they put in there for the statistic is just redundant. You don't need it. OPS plus means adjusted. For some reason, when you look at the stat, it says adjusted.
It says adjusted OPS plus.
If you look at the definition underneath it says statistic description, it says that. So I wanted to.
This would be an aside that you could edit out of this podcast.
Right. I need to kind of edit that out for sure. Kind of shorten it up a little.
Get a couple minutes back.
Yes. Can you talk for 1 second about talk about anything? So I want to find Nolan Arenado's stat when it comes.
Just talk about anything.
Yeah, well,
that's a lot of pressure.
I know. Well, how about this? We won't even do that. I'll just say that. So, for his career, Arenado, who's probably considered the best Rocky right now, his OPS plus is 115. To give you an idea of where that ranks, I mean, 115. Joey Votto last year was 160. Mike Trout was 174. Bryce Harper the year before that was 188.
OPS plus for this season or his career?
Yeah, career, right. For this season, he's still, 134, but it's early. I mean, he's having an okay season. The point is, as much as we here in town love Arenado, which he's great, don't get me wrong, he's one of the top 2 or 3 third basemen in the league, he doesn't really – he's a great defensive guy, right? And I think we need to I think looking at this statistic makes me think that and realize that and kind of process that more clearly. He isn't a Chris Bryant, and I'm not saying that as a Cubs fan, right? He's not. Comparing their kind of stats when it comes to that. So let me get Chris Bryant's. Chris Bryant. Just like that. So his career, 143. All right, so he's 20 points higher. So his defense may not be as sound, but I think that's what advanced statistics have really proven to us is that you're over the course of a season, a good hitter who's average at defense is going to outperform a average hitter who's really good at defense. You'd rather have the former than the latter. But okay, moving on to our main story. So on April 26th, last Wednesday, ESPN announced it was laying off 100 employees, a list ESPN never actually released, but Deadspin did a good job of kind of concocting and putting together thanks to a lot of angry tweets from fired personnel like NFL writer and commentator Ed Werder, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with because he was kind of the Cowboys' go-to for many, many years. He was. There was also Jason Stark, who was canned. He's a baseball guru. He was one of the founders of the Elias Sports Bureau. Is that correct, Brian? I feel like, it's like a sports reference for ESPN.
Yeah, that sounds right.
They kind of do that stuff, right? So the cuts will apparently save ESPN Disney roughly $100 million annually in salaries. So this was a money decision. And industry professionals will kind of say that, right? It wasn't as if these people were doing bad work. It was that many of them, because they were so established and well-known, their salaries were they're huge, and ESPN couldn't afford to pay that anymore. So ESPN has a lot of problems. Ratings are down, which is, Breitbart and the Daily Wire attribute to liberal bias. The only reason I know that is because I did a search for ESPN ratings, and those are the first things that came up were Breitbart and the Daily Wire.
Yeah, who's that guy? We talked about him before. He said it to Jason Whitlock said it again. Yeah. He tweeted, "When you pursue a political agenda rather than a business agenda, and people lose their jobs, remember, no one is to blame."
Oh my God!
I had to read the punctuation because it doesn't make sense as an English sentence. But
no, it doesn't.
I guess that Whitlock is saying the same thing that you were just talking about. That the claim is being made is that the ESPN is too political, therefore they don't have enough money because they're losing customers as a result of that, subscribers, and that's why they're firing people. I would like to see a shred of evidence that suggests that's the case. We talked about this before. Sorry, this pissed me off. It's
No,
it's a
no.
bunch of things. It's cord cutting. It's
Right, it's good. Cord cutting. It's millennials, right, who just don't have the time to sit down and devote to a 3 hour baseball game or a 2.5 hour football game. It's easier to turn on the Red Zone channel and watch football that way. Others say it's the price of content. So Joe Nacera, who has he wrote for the New York Times for a long time, but he writes about sports and economics a lot. He's got a piece in Bloomberg that came out a couple days ago, and he's talking about ESPN's the amount of money that they have to pay for content just continues to increase. And while Brian's talking, he'll hunt down that number and bring it back in. We've had differing opinions here, right, Brian? I think I like that. Let's just take the rest of the time to really discuss not so much this story, but what does it all mean for sports media and for cable and for content consumption, and for me, this is a story that's really way bigger than ESPN, and I think it's really just a piece of evidence to show that there's a much larger sea change happening in how that we kind of consume culture, how we
yeah,
consume sports, but also how it's produced, how it's circulated, all of these things. I mean, to see how the industry, not just sports but media writ large, has changed over 10 years is eye-opening, especially when we can compare it to how maybe the media landscape changed between 1980 and 2000, right? Like, these changes over the last 15, 16 years are so massive compared to just the previous decades that came before it. And so, I mean, you're a smart person. You're a smart guy. What do you read in this, right? Other than, I mean, you could talk about ESPN. You could talk about larger issues. What's happening?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, at first blush, my first blush reaction was, this is just a sort of everyday business kind of move, right? That people watch TV less, that they subscribe to cable less than they used to, and that's a reality that ESPN has to make, kind of along with, TV in general. I'm sure they all have to, they have to be able to put a product together, and get a return on investment for that product, and it sounds like the bottom line meant that they were overpaying some of their people. So I don't know. I read this other article that was talking about stuff that Colin Cowherd had said about these firings. And his claim is Cowherd's claim. I don't know if he said this on his radio show or on his TV show or whatever. Was that that ESPN signed a huge deal with the NBA in 2014. It was like $24 billion to carry a bunch of NBA games.
So here it is. I have it right here. So the NBA costs ESPN $1.4 billion a year.
Yeah. So
yeah.
And he said, Cowherd's claim, I don't know how true this is. His claim is when that happened, he started looking for a way out. He was like, we paid too much. They're not going to be able to afford this. And I mean, the way you just said it is right. Like it was, I used to listen to Cowherd's show in the morning, The Herd, when he was with ESPN. And he was really famous for kind of being like, Disney owns us. We don't really have to be solvent. We can sort of do whatever we want and spend as much money, and other people really can't compete with us. And that doesn't. I'm not saying that this is in contradiction with that. I mean, maybe he changed his mind and was like, oh, but we can't do that sort of a thing. That there was a switch. I think there was a time when people thought, the kind of rise of sports and sports related programming, the proliferation of different ESPNs and covering and at the same time, right, the rise of all these different regional sports networks. It seemed like there was no ceiling, that they could sort of spend as much as they wanted and they could always recoup those expenses. But the tide turned, right?
Right.
I don't know when it was, 5, 6, 7 years ago. The internet got better. Alternative access to media and to programming got better, right? Like I used to sit every day and watch Around the Horn and PTI and that sort of stuff, and I don't do it anymore. I listen to podcasts.
So what are you doing
like
during that time period? I think
differently.
I want to press you on this. What are you doing during that time, right? Instead of that hour that you're committed to those two shows, what are you consuming instead? Other than
That's what I'm saying. It's
okay. So,
yeah,
but are you watching Netflix? Are you watching Hulu? Are you watching Amazon? Like, is it your visual media consumption? Has that changed? Whereas, instead of watching sports, because you can get a condensed version of the sports information you need via podcast, you can devote other time to different kinds of culture. I mean, is that what you're doing?
Yeah. I just don't sit down and watch those things anymore. I think we shared this on one of our social media platforms, sort of why podcasting and why people are going to podcasting and what are the benefits of podcasts over other types of media. And it's all things that are true, but I had not really thought about. Like podcasts are great because you can put in your earbuds and walk to your kid's school down the street like I do and listen to half a podcast, or you can project it to your speaker and listen to it while you're doing dishes. It's just a much easier format to consume when you're multitasking than is TV. I don't know. Do you feel this way? Like more and more, I feel like the act of sitting down on a couch and watching TV bugs me because it seems like I should be doing other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not very good at it. Ask my wife. I'm not very good at sitting down.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a baseball game, I can do it. But even that, sometimes I'd rather just listen to it on the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
you can. You're right.
I think a lot of it is, people want their information quicker. We want it, in a way that we can multitask. And that TV is not that medium. But that this contract, right? Going back to this contract for the NBA that ESPN signed in 2014, 2015, 2014 it looks like that was sort of assumed, projected out over the next 10 years or whatever the contract was, that people are going to continue to consume media in the same way that they had for the 10 years before that, and that just turns out to not be the case, right? So I don't know. Like people reacted to this, like I said, in interesting ways. There was this contingency, this contingent that said it's a political thing. This is a referendum on the liberal bias inside of ESPN. We already had a podcast that explained why that's a little bit silly a couple episodes ago, and so I don't think it's that. I think this is largely a business decision.
No, it is. It is. Absolutely is. I think ESPN is probably going to be able to salvage itself and figure out, what it needs to do to change all of this. But I think it is not. You're right. I think what we're seeing here is it's a generational shift, and I honestly believe that. And I think that there are all kinds of things that go into that. There's culture, and there's economics, right, and there's social behaviors and all of this stuff. But I think ESPN, maybe this is a good move for them. Maybe it's not like a last-ditch effort to kind of cling to stuff. Maybe they're cutting weight and realizing, okay, we have to transition, we have to pivot towards the future. And because people like you and I, we are going to become the kind of main consumers of the main demographic that consumes sports in the next 5 to 10 years. And you're right, we're not going to be able to sit down and watch baseball for 3.5 hours because we have kids and we have families, okay? Or there are other things that we would like to do. I was talking to my buddy Keenan this weekend, and we were talking about, what does it all mean that the millennial doesn't want to go off and play golf for 4.5 hours? Well, it's because, and I'm sorry I keep using that term millennial, right? I think it's just those of us who are in our kind of mid to early 30s and late 20s, right? Why would you, it's the same thing that the golf industry is going through, right? Why would I want to go out and spend 5 hours playing golf, waste 6-7 hours of a weekend, when I could, you and I, you're in town, we can go have beer and have good conversation for 2 hours. That would take us 6 hours to have if we were on the golf course. I think it comes down to efficiency. It comes down to being better, maybe organizing our time. I don't think that it's about distraction as much as maybe I had thought previously, because a lot of people have talked about, there's this generation of distracted people who can't focus on anything. But I think it's no, we want more efficiency. We want to be able to walk down the street and get our kids while also learning for 15 minutes on the way there. It's not about distraction. I think it's about paying attention to something, even though that paying attention is just for 15 minutes. And I think we are creative, right? People are creative. There is new stuff coming that is being generated by that kind of that demographic, and I think you're seeing it in your athletes now too, right? To go back to what you and I write about, you're seeing a more efficient athlete. You're seeing an athlete who knows how to effectively separate their professional life from their personal life, right? The partying from, and this is a bad example. This is not maybe the most fine-tuned examples that I would like, but you see a Von Miller, right, who performs well on the field and then dedicates X amount of hours a week to doing community engagement, who you'll also see at a party, and you'll see pictures of that, right? I think that brand, like the young athlete has figured out how to fine-tune their brand and really effectively manipulate the technology that is kind of at their disposal. They have figured out how to effectively manage, their public persona and all of these things. And I think ESPN maybe is going to be more apt to be okay with that, right, and to leverage that in the coming years than it had when you had a lot of kind of old voices, old expert voices that were really tethered to a previous generation, a previous way of being that just isn't going to be around in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Quick aside, did you see that? You're talking about personal brand. Did you see that all these shoe companies told Lonzo Ball, "We're going to pass on your $1 billion shoe deal"?
Oh, really?
That made me happy. Yeah, they were like,
"Wow."
No. So I guess he'll have to invent his own shoe line. Yeah, let me say one other thing about this too. About what this firing means. If we think that Cowherd's correct, and I think there's reason to believe that he's at least close to being right, that ESPN made some bad deals, right? That they were paying their talent too much, that they were paying too much for contracts like with the NBA, for example, because times were good, and they kind of assumed that they would continue to be good. And what we're seeing now is trimming the fat because they're not hitting numbers the way that they thought they would. In the short term, that means that ESPN has to fire people, right? It means that they have to cut some of their overhead so that they can be profitable, so they can continue to make a product. Who knows if that means that they weather a short-term storm and then hire some of these people back if times get better, or if, like kind of what I see you suggesting, this is the new status quo, right? This is what the world is going to look like going forward. We're going to have to be leaner and meaner and know that there's not going to be just an infinite amount of money, of revenue kind of streaming in so we can spend on these huge contracts, right? That's the short-term reality for ESPN. But what I want to say is this is bad news for the NBA. Bad news or good news, depending on which stakeholder you're talking about. The NBA must be saying, oh shit, right? Like when we come to redo this deal, we're not getting $1.4 billion or $2.4 billion every year like we did in the past. That number is going to go down. The trickle-down effect of that, right, is teams are the NBA is making less money. Teams are making less money. Players are going to get paid less. We've spent a lot of time on this podcast on different episodes sort of saying you have to figure out what the market will bear in terms of cost. And this is an aspect of that, right? One aspect of the market is, can we charge $200 for tickets or $100 for a jersey or whatever? There's a certain point when people are going to stop paying for these things. And if you don't manage that properly, they may leave, right? You may say, it's too expensive for me to be a consumer of sports as a product or of specific sports as a product. I can't afford to be a basketball fan. Does that make sense? And this is a part of that, right? This is part of, I'm going to steal a metaphor here, of a house of cards that the industry is based on, right? The sports organizations, they have to sell tickets, they have to sell beer inside of the stadiums, they sell advertising, they have to be able to be on TV, and that's a major part of their revenue stream. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
People, this is not just a referendum on ESPN's programming, right? It's funny because the Fox Sports people are like, oh, ESPN's having a lower viewership because they're too conservative. No, Fox Sports 1, you're wrong. People are watching less TV across the board. This is not going to hit ESPN uniquely. Maybe it hit them first because they signed a couple bad deals and were spending a little bit too much money, but this is going to affect everybody, right? And when this thing sort of trickles down, all of these organizations are going to have to figure out, where do you cut? And this is always an interesting question. Where do you cut costs, right? Do you pay people less? Because, there's unions who are going to fight back against massive reductions in what you're paying talent on the field. Are owners going to take a pay cut? We know from history that rarely is the place where the prices go down. Do you increase prices in other places to offset? And if so, are people willing to pay those prices? Right. So, this is an indication of what type of investment people are willing to put into sports, right? Not watching it on TV enough is, I think, an indication of a broader sort of pullback, maybe not of sports generally, maybe that people don't want to watch sports, but what are they willing to pay to watch those sports, right? And subscribing to cable is a part of that.
Let me kind of bolster your last point there a little bit. So ESPN charges. I'm reading. I'll just read Joe Nacera's quote here. Only a handful of cable channels get more than $2 a month per cable subscriber. ESPN charges over $7 per month. $7 a month per subscriber. When you throw in the rest of the ESPN channels, that number approaches $10. So to give you an idea, like that means that $10 of your cable bill is just ESPN.
Wow.
I think people, that's crazy, right? So basically, you could pay $9.99, get all the Netflix you wanted streamed, okay, and you'd be paying as much, right, for that as you would for ESPN, okay, or what is HBO now? I think $14 a month.
Yeah.
It's this, but that's not even. You don't even get a choice with what you're watching with ESPN, right? There's no decision. I mean, you have 4 different channels. I guess that's what your choice is. But shit, you turn it on ESPN. I think I tried to turn it on this weekend at 2:00 on Saturday. There's nothing on. Yeah. Right? I can watch day 5 of the NFL draft or whatever, but I don't want to do that. And I guess the Cubs and the Red Sox that game was luckily just about to start. But I mean, that for people who are cognizant of what they're paying in their cable bill, that's going to piss you off, right? That you're going to that's the reason why people are cutting cords is stuff like that. And so good for ESPN. Maybe I think they have the tech, they have the ingenuity to realize that it doesn't take a team of 15 people to create maybe a weekly show. Maybe it's because of advancements. It's just a more efficient production process, right? You can look at you and I. We produce a podcast. It's not the highest level of production, but I mean, us doing this 7 years ago was impossible. Right? We would have had to have a sound engineer. We would have had to had a booth, right? We do this from our offices, right? You do this from your house, and so I think. Hey, props to ESPN. I don't think they're not going to go away, right? They have these massive deals. They have a new TV deal with the Big Ten that cost them $2.6 billion a year. They have a 12-year contract with the NFL. They have the college football playoffs. They have the NBA. They're going to be fine, right? ESPN is going to be just fine, and I think it has nothing to do. These decline probably has very little to do with liberal or conservative commentators. That's all bullshit. I think it's just everybody's trying to figure out how are you going to attract people like Brian and I, right? How do you attract us and our wives and our friends? Because there are things in our life that we value that way more than sitting on the couch and vegging out, right? We still want to do that, but I'd rather do it, with a cold beer in hand, a good cold beer in hand, right? Or maybe I want to do it while I'm listening to the game and running and mowing my lawn. Right, so it's just a different world that we're coming into, and I think let's not read too much into what is happening at ESPN. I think they'll be fine.
Remember though, them firing these people was one of a range of possible choices. They could have gone and tried to get more money out of cable companies. Notice they didn't do that.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
They were like, that's not going to happen.
Nope.
This like them firing people as opposed to taking some of these other choices, right? Is an indication that they are recognizing, the writing is on the wall. They understand what's going on.
Yep, they're going to be.
Yeah, that would make them, less popular.
I feel like I'm on ESPN's defense the last few weeks, which is odd. But I guess if it wasn't for ESPN, we wouldn't even be able to have a lot of our sports conversations that we have. Brian, thanks for joining today, buddy. Thanks for co-hosting with me. Thanks. Yeah, you're a hell of a co-host, let me tell you. Thanks to everybody for listening. Remember, you can find us, subscribe to us, and rate us on iTunes and Stitcher. You can follow us on Facebook at Sports Nerds or on Twitter @_Sports Nerds. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking that option on the left side of our Facebook page. When you do listen to this, if you have questions for Dr. Sean Foreman, the creator of Baseball Reference and the president of Sports Reference, please message us on Facebook with those questions. Really, anything. I know I have a lot of questions about advanced analytics in basketball because they're just not quite there yet, or advanced analytics in the NFL, but we'll get there. That'll be up next week. For now, I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you for listening and for keeping this dream of ours alive.